r/askreddit, posted by Reddit user VengefulKenny. Serious. Campers of Reddit. What is the scariest, creepiest, most disturbing thing that has happened to you in the woods? When I was younger, around 14 or 15, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night, my friend and I would walk through the woods. We called this the ritual. This particular night, we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. We had flashlights, but we liked to try to navigate through the woods and turn them off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously, we hit the flashlights and spun around. Didn't see anything, so we kept walking, and we hear it again. This time, we stop and look around a bit before we decide to head back to our campsite. Then, we see what's whispering. It's a lady, crawling on the ground, whispering just some random words. She was wearing dark clothes and was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and declares that she is looking for her campsite. We ended up walking back to the campground and tried helping her find her group. Turns out, she was just super high and drunk and got lost trying to find the bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods, she would have been lost all night. Still, it was pretty creepy. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell phone service. I stayed late on the trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck, under the topper, next to all of my gear as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning, I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then, I noticed that there's a man standing at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. The dude looked homeless, has a long ratty beard, and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment on how nice of a day it is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there, with his back to me, wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and my buck knife super close. I gave him an ultimatum. I said, "Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately." He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away, and I threw my shit in the truck and left that place quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in the truck instead of my tent. It was early summer in 2006. Me, my best buddy, and our wives all decided to do a hiking trip. Nothing too wild, maybe a 10-mile trek. It was late summer in Georgia. We had stopped about 5 miles out, decided to take a break, have some energy bars and some water. The ladies had to do their business, so they went together to take care of it, as they usually do on any one of our hiking trips. They trailed off, and me and my buddy were talking about whatever, sports, work, anything. All of a sudden, my buddy stopped talking, and almost like a police canine who found the scent of a bad guy, his ears perked, and his focus became razor sharp. I asked him what was wrong. He ignored my question and immediately grabbed his hatchet. He got up and sprinted in the direction of our women. When he finally caught up, he was drenched in sweat. His eyes were razor focused on everything. They were so spooked when he jumped out of nowhere that they thought he was playing a prank on them. They immediately began to scold him from what he told me. but he immediately shushed them, looking around all the trees. When I finally caught up to where they were at, I asked him what his problem was. He looked me straight in the eyes and put his finger on his lips. Everybody remained silent for what felt like ages. Finally, he put his hatchet on his belt loop, and we all walked back to the trail. When we finally got back on the trail, he said he swore he saw someone walking down the trail the girls went. And not that anybody else couldn't be on the trail. It was just really odd. We didn't see anybody else. We hadn't seen anybody else for a few miles. This wasn't exactly the most popular trails amongst beginners. We just kind of wrote it off as a trick of the light, maybe just his imagination. It wasn't until about 2 years later that we saw the story of Gary Michael Hilton, nicknamed the National Forest serial killer. He had killed 4 hikers and decapitated all 4 of those hikers. Some of the victims were on the trail where we had had that encounter. All 4 of us felt spooked. Had we crossed paths? What would have happened had we never went and gone to check on the girls? I shudder to think, and it gives me less faith in humanity. A group of about 8 people all went camping. And this was maybe 04, 05. Out of the 8 people, I knew 7. There was one girl, Aurora, that I never met before. She quickly introduced herself to me, and we ended up hitting it off from the second we got on the trip. All of us spent time together. We went hiking, fishing, enjoyed the lakeside, and pretty much just enjoyed each other's company, especially over the food. Mike, one of my best friends, was an excellent cook. He could take anything and make it delicious, which was really helpful when we're out in the wilderness. No burgers, no pizzas around, you know? Anyway, this was a 3-day camping trip, and not that it mattered, but I was really enjoying myself, and I didn't want to leave. Something about the place we were at just felt like home. I tried explaining it to everybody, but the only one who really understood me was Aurora. Aurora had this way of making me feel so complete, you know? She just had this way to make me feel like she understood where I was coming from. Needless to say, that last night, we got pretty cozy. She ended up staying in my tent, which I luckily had for myself. Nothing ensued. I decided I wanted to take things slow, even though my heart was telling me something else. The next morning, I woke up, alone, in my tent. I went outside and saw some of the others already starting breakfast, stretching their legs out from the long night. I looked around and I asked for Aurora. Mike, my best friend, looked at me and said, "Who?" I thought it was kind of funny at first, and I said, "Aurora, you know, Aurora." He chuckled to himself and asked if I drank too many beers last night. At this point, I could see Mike wasn't joking. I explained to him again who Aurora was, that she was the woman we'd met. She said she was Andrea's friend. Mike put down the cooking utensils and pulled me off to the side before anybody else could really hear what we were talking about. He looked me straight in my eye and said, "Buddy, there's no one here. It's just us 8. I could tell he was serious, but I couldn't believe it. I had been talking to Aurora the whole time we were on the trip. She greeted me when we got here. I took what he said and didn't mention Aurora the rest of the day. As we were leaving, I started to think back on the trip. Remember when she first greeted me, she was already at the campsite. And then, I don't really remember her talking to anybody else, even at night, when we sat around the fire drinking beers, smoking weed. She didn't say much. She laughed at everything I said, and it just made me feel whole. I remembered on the way back home, I cried a little bit under my breath, and through my sunglasses. I just couldn't understand it. Nothing made sense. Mike was very, very serious on keeping it between us. Once we got back home, I unpacked, and Mike told me to come over to his house. I gotta be honest, I didn't feel like going anywhere after all the encounters this weekend. But Mike being my best friend, I knew he wasn't up to no good. I knew he had no ill will, so I came over. To my surprise, his Uncle K-Mail was there. Uncle K-Mail was like a father figure to us. Very cool, very wise, and young enough to connect with us. K-Mail had deep roots of his Aztec heritage and vast knowledge on anything regarding the spirits. He sat me down and talked with me about my encounter. At the end of my story, after explaining everything, he looked at me and asked, "Did she make you feel loved? Did she make you want to stay with her?" I was shocked, because even though I had expressed looking for Aurora, I had not mentioned that I had found her attractive or liked her in any way. I lowered my head at this question and gave him a shoulder shrug. He didn't need an answer to know how I felt. He looked me square in the eye, and he very calmly said, "Xochiquetzal, the goddess of desire. I really do believe, young man, that you were visited by her. Everything, from your desire to see her, to her desire not to be seen, it all makes sense. I would warn you to never go back to that campsite. Stay as far away from there as you can, because she will lure you, and I can honestly say that I don't think you'll make it back. You'll always be entangled with her." At this news, I broke down, shivering. It has been a long time since then. I think about that time very little now, but it's still there. She still haunts my nightmares. It's one of the most beautiful nightmares I've ever had.